Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. We are in the thick of it, a federal election to be exact, where federal political leaders are crisscrossing this great land of ours, eager for your and my vote come election day. And I'm glad COVID restrictions haven't shut down the opportunity for us to get out there and speak with our candidates face to face. We've barely had a chance to do that in the past 18 months. And there's a lot to say, especially for Westerners. They are fed up. And can you blame them? It seems that Ottawa is not paying attention to their needs. Their cries for the government to do something to help get their natural gas and oil to market seem to go unheard. Couple that with an imposition of a carbon tax, and you have a growing frustration out west. This frustration has even spawned a movement called Wexit, and even a new Western Canada federal political party called the Maverick Party. I like that name, Maverick. So just what are the key issues on the minds of Western Canadian voters? Is any party saying what the West wants to hear? Will the Maverick Party make a dent in this election? Does the West really want out? Well, joining me now to help unpack how the West will factor in this election is Danielle Smith, former politician, media personality, and host of the Danielle Smith Report here on the News Forum. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Excellent. So let's start off the bat. We've had a sudden election call. Some are complaining across the country, why now? This is not the right time. What about the West? What is their reaction to this sudden election call?
I have to wonder how many people are even really paying attention yet. To have an election call in the middle of summer, lots of people are away. I think it took people by surprise. And it's a big question of why you would call an election just when everybody is warning about a fourth wave. And we're having yet another discussion about what round of restrictions we might have. So I think the timing was a bit strange. And I don't know that the Prime Minister got off to a very good start in the first week of the campaign. You would think that because he's the one who made the decision to call the election, that he would have had a pretty clear message and a pretty clear agenda to run on. But with reports that he's now asking his caucus for wow ideas so that he can run out the rest of the campaign, it doesn't look like he's very well prepared for it at all.
Well, you mentioned COVID, and I didn't even think about when I think of issues affecting the West, but there is actually, I'd say, a good difference between how the West has handled COVID and how we have here in Ontario. You live in Alberta, I live in Ontario. We still relatively have quite a few restrictions here. Alberta lifted them all. British Columbia, they're kind of slowly getting into imposing restrictions. But how does a COVID election fare in the West versus how we seem to be not so happy with it in the East?
Well, I think this is one of the other reasons why we've got a schism in the country, is that it does seem like when Quebec does something, there is a lot of federal deference to Quebec's approach, whether it is their approach to bringing in a passport or declaring themselves a nation or putting restrictions on religious symbols in public life. Nobody wants to dare say anything that, about Quebec being offside with Canadian values. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like when Alberta wants to take a bit of a different approach, we get dogpiled on. And so sure enough, our premier was under great pressure over the last year and a half. He made the point of saying he wanted to balance lives and livelihoods. He always talked about looking at the harms that are caused by lockdowns and making sure that those get mitigated. I think he's the only political leader in the country talking that way, quite frankly. And the reward for that is to have the targeting from the federal government, and the federal government trying to bring in mandatory vaccination and vaccine passports through the back door, even though our premier has said he doesn't want them. So it seems to me that this is another area where we see that Alberta has become a bit of a punching bag during the campaign, and that's not the way to build national unity.
And the premier you speak of is Premier Jason Kenney out in Alberta. Okay, so we have about 50 seconds before we have to go to commercial. So in just broad strokes here, what are some of the key issues that the West is concerned of?
I think the main issues are going to all center around what the government's plan is on the energy sector. They launched a just transition consultation in July, just before announcing that we were going into an election. We still don't know what that means, and we need to find out.
Okay. Well, it seems we have several weeks, or I shouldn't say several, few more weeks left of the campaign. Anything can change. We saw the difference between week 1 and week 2. Polls changed dramatically. Issues have come up. Of course, then there's the Afghanistan factor. So there's still a lot that can happen between now and Election Day. So we're going to pick up this discussion right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. We're talking about what issues the Western Canada has as we are venturing through this federal election here. And joining me is Danielle Smith. Danielle, just before we went to commercial, we were kind of in broad strokes discussing some of the issues that are factoring in. You mentioned something called just transitioning. What is this?
This is what we're trying to figure out here as well, is that is the language that some of the extreme environmental groups use when they're talking about the complete phase out of fossil fuels and the end of energy sector jobs and retraining energy sector workers to do something else. I mean, Elizabeth May was always quite the former Green Party leader talked about training energy workers to install solar panels. And I have to tell you, the idea that the federal government is using this language and campaigning on it and launched it in the middle of summer as well. I mean, that isn't the way, if you want to have meaningful input on the part of energy workers about what they think the future of their sector looks like, you would do it after the election, maybe in the fall when people are paying attention. It has the feel, since it's going to be an invite-only consultation, it has the feel of them trying to engineer a result, that they're looking at ways in which that they can completely phase out energy workers. And I must tell you, if they launched a campaign of just transition for auto workers in Ontario about how we're going to survive when we no longer have auto manufacturing, you know that Unifor's Jerry Diaz would lose his mind over that.
Right.
But I'm not sure why it is they think that they can launch a campaign like this and it's not going to have impact and make people very nervous in Alberta, because it certainly has.
Well, and if you look at the numbers, again, in 2019, Canada's oil and gas export were valued at $102 billion. This isn't chump change. This is a significant part of it's 20% of our total exports. That's a significant part of our economy. So why would the government want to kind of veer into this direction?
This is the big question, is I don't think that they're fully committed to understanding that the energy sector, the traditional oil and gas sector, it's going to transform faster than any of the other sectors that are delivering energy. I've often said that you're not going to have net zero wind until you have net zero steel and net zero concrete and net zero transportation for all the truckloads that take all of those wind turbines to their ultimate site.
Right.
And so to be able to get to net zero, you have to see a transformation in the energy sector and how those principal products are made. And the oil and gas sector is incredible at innovating. We've already seen the big 5 oil sands companies have announced that they intend to be net zero by 2050. They've made that as a target. And we have all kinds of conversations about how we're going to take energy, use it, either reduce the amount of emissions that we have, reuse them to make useful products, or return the emissions to the earth with carbon capture. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of recognition that the energy sector is going to solve this problem. And that's the thing that I'm worried about, is that the government seems to be going down a track of thinking they have to eliminate the sector. We think that the sector can transform and it can get to net zero faster than anywhere else.
Now, with the federal government's carbon taxation, is that helping or hurting this mission in Alberta or in British Columbia and in Saskatchewan?
I can tell you the interesting thing that I've seen, because I talk to a lot of business owners, is that as soon as the Prime Minister said that he wanted to get to $170 per ton for CO2, a lot of entrepreneurs looked at that and said, wait a minute, we can find ways to reduce CO2 without paying $170 in tax. We can capture it and we can use it for enhanced oil recovery.
Right.
We can capture it and bury it underground. We can capture it and turn it into concrete or industrial minerals or carbon nanofiber. We can turn carbon dioxide into a feedstock, because if the alternative is to sit back and just placidly waiting for the federal government to tax us, then we can do better than that. And so there's been a major shift in the thinking in Alberta around this problem. The one thing the energy sector does so well is to look at something that looks like a waste stream and say, how can I make money out of that?
Right.
So that's the thing that I don't think has been fully appreciated in Ottawa, is just how dramatic that shift has been in Alberta.
Well, who would have known that Canada was such an innovative place? I think we all did. So this is excellent. When you raise the bar, people meet it. Now, there have been some complaints, and we only have about 45 seconds before commercial, so we can pick this up after, about the federal Conservative plan. And of course, Alberta's hosted so many seats for the federal Conservative Party. What about the federal Conservative plan with respect to carbon taxation or carbon pricing? Again, half a minute before commercial.
I would just say that part of what Aaron O'Toole, part of the problem he had is that he said he was opposed to carbon taxes. And then when he became leader, he said, yeah, but I want to put on a carbon price and it's something different. I think there's a way to thread the needle on that and to bridge the gap, but I might have to wait until the other side to do it.
Yeah, I think we had something like this in Ontario a few years ago, the cap and trade, carbon pricing, carbon taxation. I don't know. I'll reserve my opinion for this moment, but we're going to cut to commercial break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're picking up our discussion on Western issues and how they will factor in this federal election. Voting days, September 20th, so not that far off. Danielle, before we went to commercial, we were discussing carbon pricing versus carbon taxation. I don't know, it seems like the same thing to me. And then don't forget you had Aaron O'Toole, the leader of the federal Conservative Party, a few months ago come out with like these bank accounts for carbon credits, which threw me, and I still don't really fully understand that. That seems too complicated. Is there a necessity for any of this? Do you like any of these plans?
If you're going to have a carbon tax, I must tell you that Justin Trudeau's approach to it is the best one. The money goes in and then it comes right back out, and it's divvied up on the basis of how much revenue is generated in that particular jurisdiction, and it's divided up per capita, and it's easy peasy. I don't know what Aaron O'Toole was thinking in thinking that setting up a massive bureaucracy. It's almost sounded to me like a PC optimum points type system where you gain certain points and then you'd be able to redeem them on other things. But can you imagine all the work everyone would have to go to get registered to have your points accumulate and to get registered to redeem them?
Yeah,
it was a dumb idea.
Yeah,
but the smart idea, and Conservatives all need to move in this direction, is that we're kind of at the end of the line. The provinces tried to fight the carbon tax it all went all the way to the Supreme Court, and now there really isn't any way to challenge the notion. And so that's, I think, what Aaron O'Toole was responding to. If you put it to the Supreme Court to say, do we need to do something about this? And the Supreme Court says, yes, it's an urgent crisis. And if Alberta doesn't do something about it, then Ottawa will. That, I think, gives a marching orders to Alberta. What I would like to see is the Premier take the lead in saying, this is what carbon pricing looks like in the Alberta context. And I think that there is a difference. There's a difference between having money levied on your gasoline and your diesel and your home heating bill going to Ottawa and then being rebated back versus trying to create some kind of dynamic market where our ranchers would be able to manage their landscapes and sequester carbon dioxide in the soil and get a credit for that, that then could be sold to offset the emissions that somebody else is creating. Or we could be planting trees with our vast amounts of forestry expertise. And those forestry companies could be earning credits that somebody else would then be able to purchase. To me, that's the kind of market that we need to get into. We've been far too focused on the punitive side of charging companies and charging individuals when they produce. There's another side of this ledger when we're talking about net zero. It's how are we creating carbon credits to truly get to net zero and to do those offsets. And I think that Alberta is well on their way to thinking through some of those options. But I think we need to be part of a broader conversation so that they know that it's sort of a genuine transformation that's happening here. Because I truly believe it is.
You mentioned the court ruling that basically mandated, okay, something needs to happen. So I would argue, though, of course, within the House of Commons, that is where the legislation gets made. I mean, they really are the people. That's the House of Commons. They get to decide. So would a change in government, even, say, changing to the Aaron O'Toole government, would you expect to see any change on this, or they're going to be stuck in their path because they feel they have a mandate from the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that there will be some kind of carbon pricing, but we have a lot of autonomy as a province. I think what the court basically said is the federal government should act if the Alberta government does not act. And so Alberta would be able to develop our own made in Alberta type of approach. Like, I'll give you an example. We've got fugitive emissions. It's when you've got methane emissions. You've probably seen it on landfills. Yes. Where methane gets captured. Well, we've got energy companies here that are trying to find a way to capture those methane emissions and install a generator that will turn it into mining Bitcoin. I mean, those are the kind of innovative solutions that I think if you give each province the jurisdiction and the mandate and the latitude to come up with solutions, they will come up with them. I know for sure our entrepreneurs in Alberta will. And if we can start celebrating some of those successes and realize that we're all moving in the same direction, then perhaps we'd have less hostility and we'd have less combativeness across the country. I think people need to realize we're all in this together. It's going to require all hands on deck to take care of the $600 billion COVID debt and the $1.3 trillion federal debt. And climbing. You don't get there. You don't get there by alienating Albertans and by making and by dividing the country.
Well, and I think this speaks to a point you brought up earlier, that the Western Canada feels like it's been unfairly treated. And I know we only have half a minute left before our last segment after the commercial. You know, it speaks to like equalization payment, and there's a growing concern that, you know, the West is getting a real raw end of the deal there.
And I must tell you, this is the thing that the Prime Minister has to be careful of, is that 1 month after the federal election is over, Alberta is going to have a referendum to end equalization. And the way he conducts himself for the next 3 weeks is probably going to determine the outcome of that vote.
Okay, we'll discuss more on this right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on the West and what issues will factor into this election. Danielle, I remember after the last federal election in 2019, you know, this movement called Wexit sprang. Is that still a thing? I know there has been discussion about Western autonomy, but is Wexit still a thing?
They are in some inner turmoil. The original founder went off to do something else. I think his idea was that Alberta needed to become the 51st state of the United States. Then what remained of it transformed. It became the Maverick Party. Mm-hmm. And Jay Hill, who might be a familiar name, he was the whip at the federal level for the Conservative Party under Stephen Harper. He's decided that if Stephen Harper hasn't been able to fix the country, no one can. So that's why he is now leading that movement. They are being quite strategic about their approach. They identified the constituencies where they could run a maverick candidate and split the vote without having a danger of a Liberal or an NDP getting elected. So they actually chose to take on the strongest Conservative MPs. Now, here's the thing. I would have thought perhaps they might have had some chance of a breakthrough in Alberta, but Aaron O'Toole's run a really good campaign in the first week. And people are feeling, I think, that if there is a potential for there to either be a diminished Liberal minority or maybe even a Conservative minority or a majority, that wouldn't be the time to vote for another party. It's still a bit early, but he had a really good week in his first week on the campaign.
So the Maverick Party is kind of seeking a different course than, if you will, the Reform Party, which again sprang out of the frustration with the then federal PC party. Then they, of course, came back together and one big happy family, so we think, right now. Their motto, the West wants in. Now, Wexit, the West wants out. What has changed?
I think what has changed is the sense that the rest of the country just doesn't get Alberta. I mean, when you have a federal government that comes in and their first decision is to cancel the Northern Gateway project, their second decision is to drag their feet on Energy East and have that project canceled. The third decision is to pass the No More Pipelines bill, which is a cumbersome brand new process, which will make it very difficult to build a brand new pipeline in Alberta or across the country. The fourth decision being a tanker ban off the East Coast, or West Coast, specifically for our bitumen. A fifth problem, when Keystone XL got canceled, just basically telling Alberta, move on, we've got other bigger issues. I think that when you have the cumulative effect of those decisions impacting our ability to generate wealth for ourselves and for the rest of the country. Meanwhile, you see that Quebec continues to get special treatment, whether it's extra equalization payments, whether it's a $6 billion transfer for daycare, or whether it's some of the things that we talked about earlier, a free pass on declaring themselves a nation. I think that's when people see this country isn't working right. If Alberta is constantly on the receiving end of bad policy, and Quebec is constantly going to be the favored child, that's always going to create division. And it doesn't need to be that way. I mean, every province has its own authority. Every province has its own strengths and merits, and every province should be treated with the same respect.
Well, and then you have the leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, who's from Quebec, who now is surging in popularity. His party in Alberta, recent polls have it in the teens. Who would have thought that? What do you think is going on there? We have 45 seconds left.
Maxime Bernier is a favorite in Alberta. He called himself the Albertan from Quebec, and he did very, very well in the previous leadership contest against Andrew Scheer. So I think that a lot of that is personality driven, and he spent a lot of time out here during COVID. So I don't know that that's going to be enough to win some seats, but it does show that he is a bit of a favorite out here. And that's how Quebecers can talk to Albertans, is the same way Maxime Bernier does.
Okay, last 20 seconds. To sum it all up, what would it take for Western Canada to want to remain here to be part of the solution?
Well, I think that if there is some meeting of them, if we saw all political parties campaigning for unity, campaigning for genuine unity, that we're all in this together, that we've got a real problem to solve, and Alberta is going to be a central part of it, I think it could bring a lot of the temperature down. But unfortunately, I haven't seen much of that so far in the campaign.
Okay, Danielle Smith, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Take care. There are so many factors when we look in Canada and its great landscape. We have regional issues out east, to the west, to the north, and even central Canada. But we have heard this growing malcontent coming out of the west with Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan. We need to do something because we want to keep our country together. Yes, Alberta and the West is resource rich, but more than that, they are our Canadian brothers and sisters, and we need to make sure that their needs are being addressed. Will it happen this election? Time will tell. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.